Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the course of Literary Criticism Theory. We are now in the third module titled Literature, Society, and Power. We have reached so far the third section of this module, which is Postcolonial Criticism, Literature and the Legacies of Imperial Power. To introduce postcolonial theory, let's start with this powerful quote from Che Guevara's 1964 speech to the UN, when he talks about the final hour of colonialism and the collective demand for self-determination. He's capturing the exact catalyst for this entire field of study. Postcolonial theory isn't just about the day a colonial empire packs up and leaves, but it is a critical lens we use to look at the lasting aftermath of that history, specifically how empires left behind deeply embedded systems of power, of language, of cultural hierarchy. And ultimately, this framework allows us to analyze how previously occupied societies reclaim their voice, challenge ecocentric or Eurocentric biases, and use literature to rebuild identities that were distorted before by decades of colonization. It's all about understanding how that historical fracture completely shapes our cultural present. So, as an introduction, we can start by talking about how the 1960s saw a revolutionary change in literary theory, and until this decade, new criticism was the one that dominated literary theory and criticism. So, this new criticism that we have already talked about in our course, but just as a slight reminder, it's an instance that there is the one and correct interpretation of a text could be discovered if critical readers follows the prescribed methodology asserted by new critiques. So new critiques paid very little minor attention to a text's historical context or to the feelings, to the beliefs, or to the ideas of text readers. So here a text meaning is inextricably bound to ambiguity, to irony, and paradox found within the structure of the text itself. However, postcolonialism emerged as a way of study of what happened after countries were colonized and how colonization still affects people until this day. So it studies the histories, it studies the ideas, the experiences of people in formerly colonized countries. So it rejects outdated terms like third world and commonwealth. So here postcolonialism gives voices to those who were silenced by colonialism. It challenges the dominant narratives of history, of the cultures, and promotes equality, justice, and respect for all cultures. It helps us understand the lasting effects, the harsh lasting effects of colonialism, and works toward a more inclusive world. So, post colonialism as a theory or as a way of thinking and studying, it looks at the effects of colonialism when one country takes control over another and what that leaves behind within the people that were colonized. It often focuses on how colonial rule changed the cultures, it changed the identities, and it even took part in changing the literature of the colonized, the people and the lands that were taken over, in order to remain or in order to promote imperialism. So it also explores the power relationship between colonizers and the colonized, both during colonization and after colonization. So, what are the key ideas of postcolonialism, its key concerns? We could talk about colonial power and control and how colonizers imposed their culture. They imposed their language, they imposed their systems on the colonized, and portrayed their own way of life as superior and the ones of the colonized as inferior, obliging or enforcing the colonized people to adopt their own languages, their own systems, and their own cultures and ways of thinking, as the correct one and as the one that is civilized, that is enlightened. So this control was not just physical, it was also mental. It was not just through military power, but it's also mental, mainly through literature and art and representation. So it influences how people saw themselves. Postcolonialism also talks about the concept of the other. So the colonized people here were often treated as different, as strange, as inferior, sometimes even as barbaric. So this othering became a way for colonizers to just justify their control, as making it seem as if they were enlightening, they were making the inferior more or superior. I mean, trying to. The language. Postcolonialism also emphasizes the idea that many colonized people had to use the colonizers' language, which sometimes erased their own languages and traditions. And even when it comes to writing, they were obliged to write in the colonizers' language. And this can reflect how power struggles or even cultural loss, which was the case for us even in Morocco. Postcolonialism also mentions this concept or founded this concept of hybridity and identity. So, because colonized individuals often found themselves caught between two cultures, their native culture and the colonizers, having to navigate between the two and keeping themselves sometimes in a gray area, feeling not belonging to neither of those cultures. So this can lead to feelings of, being in between, and which is a concept called unhomeliness. So, what is the historical development of post-colonialism? So, 5,000 years ago, post-colonialism develops from a 4,000-year history of strained cultural relations between colonies in Africa, in Asia, and the Western world. In the 18,000s, Britain became the leading colonizing power. Its colonial interests and British Empire dominated politics and media, and colonies were exploited for their raw materials, for their goods, which was sent back to the empires or to the colonizers to create dependency. So by the middle of the 18,000s, colonized people faced really harsh treatments. They faced forced labor and slavery, even. So Westerners viewed non-white races as inferior, using terms like heathens and others. The concept of otherness justified oppression and excluded them from power. So post-colonialism started developing from the 1950s, since England began losing colonial control, and India gained independence. France ended control in Southeast Asia. So the terms post-colonial and post-colonialism emerged in academic journals within those contexts. So the terms were widely recognized in academia and in general discourse because of that. So post-colonial theory explores the experiences and challenges of colonized countries after colonization, focusing on cultural identity and future responses. So here we can talk about challenged challenges faced after colonization, which is identity confusion, economic problems because the colonies were disturbed. Even though personally I don't see this as something that's very legitimate, as it's better to gain independence and economic independence rather than still maintain the same ideology or the same narratives, that because now we are independent, we are going to face economic problems. And when we were colonized, we were not going to have economic problems since we are being, controlled by the people who would allow us or to be economically or to become economically flourishing, if you see my idea here. political issues, and so on. So, post-colonial theory focuses on reclaiming voices. So it seeks to restore the stories, the histories, and identities of the colonized who were often silenced and misinterpreted. And it challenges colonial views and questions and critiques literature and ideas that promote colonial ideologies and also highlights inequality. So post-colonialism addresses the lasting effects of colonialism, such as economic and social inequalities, which still exist until this day. I hope this provided a better understanding for you in order to start developing or to start looking more into these theories. And thank you so much. See you in the next one.